What's particularly interesting is Starmer is very, and other Labour politicians are very reticent about criticising Nigel Farage.
Mm.
And I am guessing that the reason that they're doing so is that reform came second in a lot of Labour seats, and they are concerned about if you go for him, you may actually be kind of disenfranchising some of the concerns that your own voters have.
Shall we start with Sir Keir Starmer's press conference yesterday? He says that he will not allow the far right to coordinate a summer of riots. Police are kind of preparing for further disruption, perhaps, over the course of this weekend. Some of Starmer's language I thought was quite interesting, Steve. A tiny, mindless minority in our society. He thanked officers who stood up to the intimidation and violence. He says the challenge is clearly driven by far right hatred. He wasn't pulling his punches.
No, this is familiar territory for Keir Starmer. So I'm not sure if listeners remember, but back in 2011, during the riots, he was the director of public prosecutions, and he was incredibly hardline during that period. He had a kind of like he clamped down on people left, right, and centre. Huge numbers of arrests, huge numbers of prosecutions on his watch, and he was a very, very public figure in that. And he is going for that same playbook again in every sense, in terms of the rhetoric and the language. These are mindless thugs, these are gangs, calling the police into number 10 and being very clear that they've got to kind of take a national capability approach to this. The difference from 2011 to where we are today is there has been obviously a huge change in technology. So back then, we were talking to police leaders yesterday. They were kind of saying that people were organising it with Blackberries and the kind of technology that they had then. Now they're using kind of apps to military grade levels of encryption, Telegram, other things like that. And my colleague Fiona Hamilton disclosed that there's going to be far right rallies in as many as 8 cities this weekend across the country. So police are worried. They're stepping up resources. You're going to have prosecutors on standby to deliver swift justice. And it's the question, as often, is how bad is it going to be? And we'll see that play out over the weekend.
Yeah, and the additional challenge, as you say, with the technology in mind, Keir Starmer warning social media companies yesterday, and indeed those that run them, that violent disorder whipped up online is a crime. Here's the quote: "It's happening on your premises. The law must be upheld everywhere. We will take all necessary action to keep our streets safe." And I'm just quite struck, Steve, by is there a perception or a reality of a gulf between how politicians speak about the actions required from social media companies? They may even legislate for that, but actually, in reality, are social media companies able to take the action that politicians are demanding of them?
I'm sure social media companies could take the action. I think the question is, will they? And
Mm.
the question is also, that was strong rhetoric from Starmer. What does it actually mean? What does he mean when he says, to do whatever is necessary to keep our streets safe? He's not going to shut these social media companies down. There doesn't appear to be any stick. It's more a positioning exercise to tell them you've got to be more responsive. The government has a counter disinformation unit that flags content that it thinks steps over the mark, but it's actually quite limited what governments can do, and especially when some social media platforms, such as X and others, are kind of taking a more permissive attitude to what is on their forums. It means that stuff that you would hope is kind of down immediately goes viral, and that was one of the things that we saw with the riots that happened in Southport, that there were some extraordinary disinformation that was completely false about what had happened there and about the suspects. It was inaccurate, but it ended up kind of galvanizing right wings to riot, and that is possibly what we're going to see this weekend as well.
Yeah, and we also, I mean, we shouldn't sort of sidestep the questions for politicians in all of this. The Times reporting through the week that Nigel Farage insisted he was asking very legitimate questions when he asked, excuse me, whether the truth is being withheld about the Southport attacks. So yes, there might be the use of online platforms, but this is an actual member of Parliament who was asking these questions that he says were legitimate, but the accusation was that he was whipping up rioters in Southport.
What's particularly interesting is Starmer is very, and other Labour politicians are very reticent about criticising Nigel Farage.
Mm.
And I am guessing that the reason that they're doing so is that reform came second in a lot of Labour seats, and they are concerned about if you go for him, you may actually be kind of disenfranchising some of the concerns that your own voters have. Farage has changed tack overnight, so he is now saying that he condemns any violence and disorder, but he is saying that there will be, if you ain't seen nothing yet, is essentially his message. There will be more violence, there will be more disorder, and he is linking it to wider discomfort that people have about societal issues and the breakdown of society, as he puts it. So he's obviously not going to stop talking anytime soon. And there's a question as to whether that may fuel things. Some critics will say it does. Other people will say he's voicing valid concerns.
Yeah. On the other issue we mentioned then, the BBC and the aftermath of the Hugh Edwards scandal, Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy is going to speak to the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, after Hugh Edwards pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children. The suggestion was that they were going to be speaking over the phone yesterday to discuss the organisation's handling of the case. Have we learned anything from that call? Should we expect to learn anything from that call, Steve?
I think we didn't learn much. She just expressed significant concerns on multiple fronts about what's happened at the BBC and the way that they'd behaved. There were kind of wild rumours yesterday that Tim Davie might step down. They didn't come to fruition. He appears to be staying, but it is a very difficult story for the BBC, and there will be a political imperative on the government to be showing that, as Lisa Nandy is trying to, that they get it and that they are concerned about what happened, and the fact particularly that he continued to get paid after his arrest. So that is something that the BBC is going to have to continue to grapple with today.
Yeah, indeed. We'll keep an eye on that one then, Steve. Thank you very much. Great to speak to you. Steve Swinford there, who is political editor of The Times.
Nice, got that.